Allora, benvenute e benvenuti all'ultima serata del terzo modulo di Generative AI del gruppo Social Computing e sponsorizzato da Circular Health e di H, che ringraziamo, e ringraziamo anche OGR per averci ospitati. E questa serata abbiamo Valerio Di Donato di 34 Big Things, il primo studio di sviluppo videogiochi in Italia, e avremo anche Pierre Vinson di PlayOn, che è un publisher, il primo publisher in verità di distributore cross-mediale in Europa. Quindi senza troppe presentazioni introduco Valerio, che invito, e quindi che ci ovviamente introdurrà al mondo della generative AI e i videogiochi e insomma contenuti multimediali. Grazie.
Grazie a te. So the talk will be in English, so I'll switch to English right now. I'm Valerio Di Donato, CEO, founder and CEO of the 4 Things, and as you said, we are the biggest Italian developer right now. But you know, I think it's super interesting for us to give you a little bit of context about where we started, when we started, because I do have a master's degree in AI that I got at the IT University of Copenhagen, like decades ago now. So AI has always been a passion of mine, but to understand a little bit of the context of what we did so far in AI, I think it's critical to understand that we started just 3 people, so me and a couple of friends, here in Turin 11 years ago. And we were just people out of the university. We got a little, a little project going on. And we started in the sitting room of our apartment. And the classic joke that we do is like, we started in the sitting room because it's not warm enough to start in the garage, like, the Silicon Valley kids usually do. But it's funny because we started in 3 people. We go to 9 like pretty quickly because we were looking for talent in Italy. And fun enough, Italy is full of talent, and that's an easy one to say, but it's even easier to create a company and find that talent in Italy, in my opinion. Fast forward to 2016, we launched our first title. It's called Redout. It's a futuristic arcade racing game, and the game is successful, especially for the size that we were at the time. Fast forward to 2019, we co-produced a title called Redout Space Assault, which is a spin-off of the original game, with Apple, and we launched it as the launch title for the new platform Apple Arcade, which I'm pretty sure you are familiar with. And then fast forward again to the end of 2020, we got acquired by Embracer Group, which is the biggest public company in games and transmedia today, for a long series of reasons, which I'm not here to talk mostly. So yeah, that's pretty much us. And then I leave it to Pierre for a little bit of introduction.
Hi guys, pleasure to be here. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we can.
All right. So I guess you're gonna flip the pages, Valerio.
Yes.
All right. So nice to meet you all. Even though I cannot see you, I'm definitely here in spirit. I'll apologize if I need to sneeze from time to time. I caught a bad cough. So yeah, I'm Pierre. I'm responsible for strategic partnership here at PlayOn. Been in the company for 11 years. And one of my remit is also AI integration within the group. So I've been working with Valerio and a number of very talented studios across the Embracer Group that have very specific problems that we think we can solve with AI. So a little bit more about PlayOn. If you know us, we are 30 years old. We started in 1994, and we are quite a diversified digital entertainment business. Our core business is development and publishing of PC, console, and VR games. I'm going to touch on that later. We're also a global publisher of those games. We do film publishing, also in Italy. Partner publishing, which is distribution of physical goods for partners like Ubisoft, Activision, and so on. And we also have a merchandising arm. Next slide, please. So we're really into building world-class franchises, and God knows there is many of them within the Embracer Group. Our most famous ones are Dead Island, Saints Row, Hot Wheels, that is closer to you guys via our studio Milestone, Metro, and other third-party published games like Payday. about our studios, because I think this is probably more relevant to you. On the next slide, please. Dambuster, the creator of Dead Island 2, are based in Nottingham. We have a small studio focused on narrative-driven game called Digixart behind the game Road 96. We have Fish Labs, who was in mobile before and recently released Chorus and work on many of our internal titles as well. Flying Wild Hogs, which is 3 studios in Poland behind Hard Reset, Evil West, and many other games. Next slide, please. Voxler, which is a studio in the south of France, who's been doing yearly releases of a karaoke game that's been working really nice for us. And last but not least is Wow Studio, which is the creator of Kingdom Come, and we just announced recently our next iteration of the title. They are based in Czech Republic. Next slide, please. Now, our 2 last studios are also publisher themselves, so they have their full value chain within the studio. Milestone is also founded in 1994. I'm sure some of you know people there, and their most famous game, MotoGP and Ride franchise. They recently released Hot Wheels, a 2 iteration, and Monster Jam as well. Vertigo Games is our VR focused studio. They are only doing VR games. They are both a developer. They have 2 studio locations, a publisher, but also an operator of out-of-home VR experiences. So a company called Springboard. So we're very proud of our studio network within Playon. And again, this is just about Playon. So we are 2,200 employees, and as a matter of fact, our second biggest cohort of nationality within the company is Italy, due to our presence with Milestone and also our publishing offices for Playon in Milano. So that gives a bit of context about who we are.
Awesome.
Valeria.
Thanks. Yeah. So we wanted to start giving you a little bit of context about what is AI in games, which is usually very different from what AI means right now in the academic world or in the tech world anyway. And I think that kind of context is important to understand a little bit better what we're going to talk later. And then we're going to talk, of course, about generative AI, because everything is about generative AI today. But to start with that context, every single game ever made usually has to integrate some sort of AI. And it's super funny for me to just think about the fact the very first games ever made started with some kind of AI integrated in them. Meaning that we are talking about games from the 50s, so way before I was born. They were already integrating some sort of AI. In the sense that you needed to play against somebody, and most people who had access to computers back then, they didn't have many friends, so you need to play against something. And it's super interesting as well to understand that every single time that the game industry or anything that has to do something with the game industry integrated some sort of technology that was a little bit better or a little bit closer to a real AI than our usual efforts. Those examples were very public. So just a few examples came to mind. One is the super obvious one that I put into the slide, which is the very first time that one AI beat a human player chess, which is the Deep Blue, one of the first supercomputers out there, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's a public story. I'm pretty sure that you know something about this because it was huge in the media back in the days. But at the same time, every single attempt that our industry did was very, very public and very well received at the time. So one very good example, if you played anything in your life, is Black and White, for instance. So the very first time that there was a reinforcement model learning what you were doing, you had basically you were teaching a creature while you were playing your game, and that creature was learning from you, and that was one of the very public attempts in the game industry. And all of this is important as context because the game industry, when it comes to AI, is very specific to why we make AI and what does it serve, what's its purpose, right? And this is critical to understand basically everything that we're going to talk about in the next slides and later on. The very first point that we need to understand is that AI in games doesn't need to be smart. It doesn't need to be interesting from an academic point of view. It doesn't need to be intelligent to some sense, but it needs to be fun. It needs to be engaging with the player. Sometimes it needs to guide the player through an experience, and it needs some sort of intelligence to achieve that purpose. But it's very specific, right? So when it comes to a racing game, for instance, you don't need the best AI possible out there to be faster than anyone else on the planet, because that's not the point of one AI in a racing game. What you need to do is like provide an interesting race for the player, which means sometimes you need to be better than your average player. Sometimes you need to be worse, which means slower than your average player. And the long story short is that one of the best pieces of technology that you can integrate in a racing game, for instance, is dynamic adaptation. So some software AI which adapts its driving style and performances depending on how the race is going, how the player is going. That has been done quite a few times in mainstream racing games, and I would say that's probably one of the most solid examples of what you can actually achieve when you do that. Milestone did the very first public, and by public I mean that they released this piece of technology in a game with MotoGP 19, which is now 5 years old or something like that. When they integrated some sort of neural network to have better AI, and by better again I mean dynamic adaptation. We did integrate some sort of genetic algorithm to fine tune our AI in the original readout, and we're talking about 2016 now. And again, I was talking about context before, because when I say that we did integrate some sort of genetic algorithms in 2016, I mean that I coded that in a weekend, and the fine tuning ran on a laptop for 2 days. So I mean, we didn't have that much of GPU computing power at the time, but you still managed to do something, achieve something. So yeah, that's a little bit of the context that I wanted to provide, and I leave it to Pierre to talk about Gen AI instead.
Yeah, we just wanted to give a bit of context that the way we look at it at PlayOn and with Valerio as well is that yes, we're gaming companies, and we are focusing on delivering the best possible creative experiences to our users. And I'm sure you all very well know that games have become increasingly complex to build and expensive, and we do see generative AI as an opportunity to empower our people and to let the creative to focus on what they do best, which is really building awesome games. Yeah. So this is kind of like an overview of some of the use cases that you can apply to pretty much the entire value chain of what it is to run a company, to build or develop a video game, but also bring it to market. So we are definitely looking into some of these areas. We try to look at it through a prism of what is the most feasible and what is the most impactful, both in terms of efficiencies, or for real in-game application, what is the most transformative. So we're going to touch on that a little bit later. Valerie, you want to switch and take the next slide?
Sorry, come again?
Can you flip the page? I don't see what you guys see. All right, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So yeah, as Valerio said, this is artificial intelligence is not new, right? Obviously, it all starts with the right infrastructure and architecture and the right data when you want to use your own model. Hopefully, there is a lot of software companies that are releasing software and services that are not requiring necessarily you to operate your own models. So when we look at maybe the lower end of the market, or let's say smaller budget and studio in scale, that's probably where the opportunity lies, and there is already many services that allows you to increase efficiencies and productivity. Next slide, please. I think what was really shocking for me, and I was one of those guys that jumped on the bandwagon at the time. I don't have any academical background like Valerio, but I was really impressed that that was the fastest app ever to reach 100 million MAU. I don't know what are the current statistics, but it's really interesting to see that it's become a huge wave, and we are only starting to grasp the capabilities of things like ChatGPT and generative AI through every aspect of every industry. Next slide, please. In terms of use cases, I think you will probably recognize a lot of them. If you ask everyone in our company, they will tell you that they have different use cases. But I think in broad stroke, this slide shows you that there are a lot of opportunities to utilize some of those tools, or let's say more general purpose tools like ChatGPT to do some of writing improvements or conceptualizing game design or text and so on and so forth. So yeah, we're looking at it through a very wide lens, but again, trying to focus on what we think is the most impactful and bring the most positive ROI, while putting our people in the middle. We do see that as a tool. It's like putting an Iron Man suit on yourself and becoming 1,000% more efficient, rather than replacing tasks and functions. Next slide, please. Another interesting slide from this research from Activate Consulting, I recommend you checking it out, is the fact that 62% of people working in content generation, so here content generation is basically people creating, editing, and posting online videos and photos, are actually using generative AI already. And the reasons for most of them are pretty similar. It helps with the creative process, it saves time and money, which is something that's obviously important in the context of increasing cost and complexity of building and shipping games to the market.
Okay, thanks a lot. And we are at the end of the context, so I hope that a little bit of I would say narrative to support what generative AI is currently being used in general terms for the creative industry is important to understand from where we come from as an industry and ideally where we're going. But the long story short here is that I wanted to have some kind of conversation with the audience. I have a little bit of an interactive talk instead of the usual ones where we just talk, but usually those are very, very difficult to pull off, and also usually you don't get much questions. So we did what we should be doing today, which is okay, then we ask ChatGPT what your questions should be, and then if at the end of this presentation you still have questions, then we probably got something wrong. And if you don't, I mean, we win because we can go home. That's pretty much it. So without further ado, the first one, it's very specific. So long story short, the questions are pretty much random in the sense that we try to talk about a lot of different topics, from business to production to game design to level design to coding, to pretty much trying to touch every single aspect of game dev. And then we just remove the ones that legally we are not allowed to answer right now. So that's pretty much it. So Pierre, the first one is can you give us a definition of what's a source of truth? Because usually, I mean, it's not a very popular term out there, probably outside of corporations. And then how can AI help make it more accessible for an organization?
Yeah, I think we have a very specific use case in our company, what we call source of truth. I don't know if this is a common term yet, or if there's another term for that, but that within Embracer, we have some pretty amazing IPs that spans across many, many years and different medium, whether it's books and games and films and game design document and conference data and so on and so forth. And typical example for PlayOn, we have a game called Metro, which is based on a book from a Russian author. It's been released on several platforms and games, and there are even let's say, lores that are even deeper than that, like Lord of the Ring is probably one of the biggest one, or Tomb Raider from Crystal Dynamics. And for those, you know, long-lasting franchises and IPs, there's not really a single person in any of those companies that can tell you, okay, how does the chronology of events work in the story, or how does those worlds connect together? Is that canon or not within the franchise? Can you know, Valerio have you know, a red out car in the next Tomb Raider? Probably not, but that's maybe the easy answer. But you know, to basically retrieve that that data and those facts, at least on a first level check, that's quite useful for, you know, designers and producers and anyone involved in the game development. So there are ways to use easy to use LLM that are trained on specific data of the lore, and yeah, collecting all that data across different mediums. So that's what we call a source of truth.
Thanks a lot. I can also provide 2 additional examples about how we do use AI to help with the source of truth problem. And the first one is, so in games you usually start with a lot of text written down by game designers in something that we call the game Bible, or the game design document, or GDD for short. And in the GDD, I'm sorry, you can find every single information about implementation of every single feature that you're going to have in the game at some point. A high-level overview, what's the intent behind that feature, and then down to the specs. And by specs, I mean you can find Excel sheets with a lot of numbers and formulas about implementation. You can find every single detail about a lot of stuff. But usually, I mean, you know, programmers, artists, or developers in general, they do have a lot of questions when something is not 100% clear, or when that information is buried somewhere in that GDD. Because, I mean, like, for instance, the GDD on the title we are working right now is like 250 pages. So finding information there is still a real problem. So the long story short is that what usually happens is that you open the GDD, you do a Control F, you start looking for what you need, and at some point you either find it or you go to the designer and ask for exactly what you need, right? So what we came up with is, okay, let's try to train an AI on our data, and let's see if we can get, you know, proper answers from reading from the GDD, looking in the GDD, instead of a human, you know, using his time to do that. And the outcome is pretty amazing, because, I mean, you can just ask questions to the document to get the same information. So that's, you know, one use case that, you know, we definitely use every day. And the second part is about standard architecture and implementations, about, you know, something specific that you usually do in engine. So for instance, we use a real engine, and sometimes when you want to create something very specific, we do have, again, a very specific way to achieve that, which usually is in the documentation, if, you know, everybody work according to pipeline, if everything went correctly, if everything went right, and, you know, most times that doesn't happen. So long story short, we try to find those specific cases and the best what we can do, and we do we did try to train AI to provide those examples on request. And one example is, for instance, if you want to implement a timer, we have a very specific way to make sure that that timer triggers at the exact same time we need it. And, you know, that's a very complex situation. So I don't want to get too much into details, but we do have a very specific implementation of this thing, for instance. So every time we have to start a new feature that requires it, sometimes every time somebody needs to do a code review of that specific implementation to make sure that is according to our pipeline. Whereas if we can ask AI to just provide me the template for this, you know, that usually helped us to actually remove a lot of additional work of overhead in our case. So next one. How will you see AI enhancing player immersion in current games?
Yeah, maybe I can take that. I think some of you probably saw demos from GDC onward on things like InWorld or NVIDIA Ace, where, you know, typically you play an RPG game and you know, typical Kingdom Come Deliverance one, and you come, you talk to an NPC, and you have maybe 3-4 choices that are presets, and you have dialogue branches based on that, and context continues like this. Now with those language model, you can actually instead of having this preset choice, having just a press to talk, and the AI will analyze your input and give you an answer. So that's a pretty amazing thing to witness. The chance to try some very controlled demo that was pretty amazing. So in the NVIDIA Ace demo, for example, you land in a hotel and you need to get to a guy, but you don't have this room number, so you go to the clerk and ask, hey, I'm like part of this conference and I want to meet this guy, and I forgot his room number, can you tell me? And of course she will tell you no, so then you need to start exploring and so on. It's pretty amazing. Obviously it comes at at some risk and some cost, so you need to make sure first of all that you don't break the immersion, because if you start asking questions that are completely out of the experience and the AI actually give you answers, then that's just gonna ruin the experience. And as we really care about our experiences and narratives, this is not something that we want to see happen. So that there needs to be guardrail. There are also more things that you can do, which is let's say this NPC of a clerk in a hotel. Maybe there is another NPC not too far that is at hearing distance from this first NPC, and then also get the context of your question. But you need to be able to track all that data live in the game. So that requires obviously implementation and a lot more data flows than you would usually do. So it has a technical cost as well to run those models, and yeah, that's something that I think will be really amazing in terms of player immersion and personalization of experience. We'll be playing the same game and maybe come to the same outcome, but have a completely different experience in between. And that's the kind of thing as gamer that we're all really excited about, but we think that it needs more time in experimenting and making sure that the experience is controlled and the cost consideration are also making sense. Valerie, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I do have a very specific scenario in mind that I wanted to talk about, being probably the biggest problem I do have as a player in current games is like standard reactions from NPCs. That's probably my biggest grudge, right? So one of the nice things about being human instead of being an NPC is that you can understand the context and the mood of what's going on in front of you, right? So like, for instance, if I just take out a knife from my pocket and I put it on the table, you probably understand that it's either a prop of, I'm preparing for something, or you do understand that you are not in immediate danger for unless I jump at you at some point for some reason, which is something that is not that trivial to do in video games, right? So the general expectation you have when you play, let's say, an NPC immersive sim something, when you go around a city with a knife in your hand, is like either people just run off because that's the basic implementation, right? You see a weapon, then you run off, or nothing happens. And I will say that there's a lot in between there that generative AI can definitely help delivering. That's my biggest grudge, I would say. So, next one. What are the most exciting applications of PCG, procedural content generation, in games today?
Yeah, I think maybe we can continue. I mean, we touched on some of that already with things like adaptive storytelling, or like really reactive and realistic environment, NPCs, or even wildlife. I think we see some of that already in games like Red Dead Redemption and others. Dynamic weather is already something that's quite common in games as well. Randomize items or loot that you can gather in games. And I think what I'm personally excited about is also the personalized player experience. So like what kind of mission are you gonna get if you have a certain play style or a certain interaction with the game, and me and Valerio can have two completely different experiences of the same game in the end. I don't know if you want to explain.
Yeah, no, I always try to add something if I can. Otherwise, I'll just keep it. But long story short, I guess that it's probably interesting and important for me to share the context of there's a lot of procedural content generation in games in the last 25 years of the game industry, and like one of the classic examples that comes up always when you talk about PCG is one is Minecraft, and the second is any roguelike. So a roguelike is a very specific game genre where the ability to replay over and over the same levels, and by same levels I mean something that looks like the same, has the same aesthetics, but it plays differently. That's critical to that's a foundation of the genre, for instance. So that's important to just let it out that PCG, procedural content generation, has been out there for decades for us, and it's critical to a lot of things we do. So, is there a beloved game that you played and remember because of its procedural content generation, Pierre?
Well, I can definitely relate to that. I think I spent more than 100 hours, unfortunately. I don't know if that's a good thing in a roguelike, which is Spelunky 1 and 2, but 2 was really where I spent the most time. And you have this little guy that needs to spelunk down a cave, and you have many different levels. It's very brutal. It's very punishing. And every time you're going to apply, you have a different experience. The basics are the same, but you always get into situations that are so ridiculous. You think that, oh my God, I just hate this game. But you end up just going back to it because every time is fresh and every time is challenging, I guess. What about you, Valerio?
I'm a huge fan of roguelikes. That's why I started with it before. So I will go with Dead Cells right now, I think, because what they do in terms of like delivering consistent quality in the level design, although it's all procedural generated, it's amazing. So I'll start there. How do developers balance procedurally generated content with handcrafted elements to ensure quality and uniqueness?
Yeah, I guess it's more a question for you, but I can start opening the risk is that you start creating generic things, and that's something that you don't want to see happening in your game. So let's say you want to build a large open world, and you have like hundreds of tables that you need to fill your world with, and we feel that generative AI can be doing quite a good job already in conceptualizing and lifting some of the donkey work in a way of the structure and so on. But then you have a designer that can come in and actually tweak the asset and make it really unique, because that's what you want in the end. Yeah. So there is a real opportunity in being a lot faster in coming to market in developing games by lifting the less meaningful work of designing and building the scaffolding. And that doesn't have to be necessarily in terms of assets. I'm sure there are many other examples that you can relate to, Valerio.
Yeah, no, I mean, makes a lot of sense for me as well, meaning that like, so I will say that my answer is probably very specific to the size of my studio, and probably how we evolved into how we do things internally. But I guess the long story short is that sometimes we do prefer to use, handcrafted elements when it comes to the main story, to the main storyline, to the main quest, call it whatever. But then we tend to use PCG or procedural content generation when it comes to side quests, because they provide a lot of value to the players, meaning they spend a lot of time if they enjoy that kind of quest, that kind of challenge. And then for us, the combination is probably finding the balance between how much we want to do handcrafting in the game and how much we can automate, not because it's lower quality, because but at the end of the day, games are a product, and you have to balance the value that you're providing your customers in this case. So probably yeah, that's probably correct. So the amount of quality that you want to put in your game is one metric, and then the amount of quantity that you want to put in your game is another metric, and it's always a balance between those two. With or without AI, it's always the same. How is generative AI going to influence the creative process in game design?
Well, again, I think it's more a question for you, but I would assume, Valerio, and tell me that because you will be able to iterate a lot faster on ideas, that's going to change the way the different creators of a game interact with each other in the game development process.
If at any point in the future we get a tool that basically allows us to generate, like, let's say, level blockouts based on a prompt, based on a video, based on something, a multimodal prompt, then at that point, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the work of game design at that point is like generating the right prompt to get some kind of level design done, and then iterating on it manually. So to that sense, what I'm trying to say, I guess, is like probably much like how I currently use ChatGPT in doing the bulk of the work automated, and then I do fine tuning by hand. I'm probably expecting to evolve game design in a very similar way, especially when it comes to pre-production. So pre-production is basically anything that goes from the idea to the concept to the prototypes that define basically the mechanics that let you play the game without the proper aesthetics, but you can play the game at that point. So in this phase specifically, I think that will change a lot. Everything after this point, which is what we usually refer as production. So that means that we defined a lot of the unknowns. We do have risk management strategies for our development, production, whatever. Yeah, probably for production per se changes very little, at least for what I envision right now. But pre-production should change a lot. Are there any potential drawbacks or limitations that developers should be aware when using generative AI?
Yeah, I guess the first one we touched on, which is creating generic and ungenuine content, and that's never resonating well. I'm sure, I don't know how it is in Torino, but I can tell you that in Munich I already saw very poor advertisement for local businesses, and you can instantly see this is using generative AI for assets creation, and it just feels wrong to me, at least. The second thing is breaking immersion. We talked about that when it comes to narrative and having a large language model dialoguing with the player. Copyright issues. I think there is a big legal question on and where to draw the line on what is actually original or not. So I think that there is a need for a framework here. The training data may be biased and harmful, so you need control on that as well. I think it's important that whether it's in terms of assets creation or narrative, that you always have an expert at the end that can actually judge if the work is ready to ship and be put in front of your players. Same way than when you guys, I'm sure, are using ChatGPT personally, it very much depends on your input and also on your ability to judge if this is factually correct. And if you're not sure if you're taking a risk that is too high compared to the return in using the outcome. I think one of the risks as well of generative AI when it comes to assets and just being quicker to market is, I expect personally that there will be a lot more content releasing. I think it's kind of already true in some other industry that are maybe slightly less complex, like music, for example. I was shocked to hear that 25% of all the songs on Spotify have never been listened even once. And as content stays on digital platforms, that creates a risk that there is just a growing number of poor quality games that just flooding the pipes of those marketplaces. Is there any risk that you think are really major, Valerio?
So I don't. First of all, I do agree with what you said, and I'm not sure I have much to add in general terms. But yeah, I guess the order that you use is probably the same that comes to my mind as well. Starting from probably the risk of losing quality, over quantity, as I said before, is probably the easiest one to envision right now, or to see right now. The example you did about the German local business is a funny one, but at the same time, I guess I guess the question becomes like, can you actually improve the quality of like very bad graphics out there? By graphics, I mean, again, local business stuff, because they use AI, or it's going to be just worse because of that. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's a tool, right? So it really depends on how you use it, probably in every industry.
Yeah, and I think in general, as human and across industries, you need to ask yourself, like, if you over rely on AI and become kind of like intellectually lazy as well. I think it's a great sparring partner in conceptualizing and putting ideas together, especially when it comes to text and data, as far as I'm concerned. But you should always make sure that it doesn't really harm you on the long term. That you start losing ideas because you just have so much speed and so much access to information that you get distracted.
I'm not sure about your like social circle, but a few days ago, I'm pretty sure that you guys know ChatGPT, like many other big Gen AI tools, were offline. And I already saw a TikTok, complaining about it, saying, hey, that they actually have to think. And, that made me laugh more than I should, probably. So, still funny. Okay, next question. So what ethical considerations should developers keep in mind when using AI in games? I think you already touched a few of these, but please go.
Yeah, well, I think we probably covered most of the one that I can think of. I mean, when it comes to a P2 and personal information, you obviously to ensure that data privacy is protected. I mean, as far as Playon is concerned, we have pretty strict policies in terms of compliance, in terms of legality of usage, and how we handle our data sets with AI. And again, it's about controlling the outcome and having the right check and balance in place before you ship to public any of those AI solvable problems.
Thanks. I honestly don't have much to add. Mostly because you already mentioned most of the same points that I will probably discuss in the earlier question. But then I guess we are in a bit of that weird situation where it's probably a bit too early to question a lot of the things that are happening, and it's probably too late for other questions. So I think we're in a very weird situation because of that.
I agree.
So how can developers ensure that AI-driven games are fair and unbiased?
Yeah, I think we've seen a couple of initiatives, especially coming from the incumbents, companies like EA and Ubisoft that have been in the business for a long time and shipping games, having lots of data and resources to actually been working on it for quite a while. So, they can ensure that they have enough diversity in the data sets for training. They can also do testing against bias. I think Ubisoft is doing that on Assassin's Creed, and they try to identify and correct any bias with multiple test groups, and they also use AI there. They obviously also have quite strong ethical and AI frameworks. We do have policies around it, as I mentioned, as Playon. I think some others are also using community feedback and making sure that they continuously improve the systems where they use AI in moderation, for example, and making sure that there is fairly and accurately enforcement of the standards and that without bias. So we're not doing much of it yet in terms of content moderation as far as a Playon is concerned. I think some others are experimenting within the group. But yeah, again, the training data is really important, and making sure that you have enough sources that are diversified enough, and training data and collecting it is definitely a cost.
Yeah, I think the tool itself should be trained to specifically to avoid biases. You're right on that. But then I think that at the same time, you should provide a tool that if you need to access those biases, you should be able to. Because most of the times we do need to avoid biases, but sometimes you actually need them. You have to use them, right? So for instance, a prompt that makes sense in my mind is like, okay, I need to design a car, and the design of that car should change a lot if I'm designing it for the US, if I'm designing it for Europe, if I'm designing for the Middle East. I mean, at that point, I do want some kind of biases there. Like, okay, again, a car that is strictly designed for a very specific locale is, needs to be different anyway. So ideally, I want to be able to select biases at some point. But usually, like the default should be unbiased, of course.
No, but that's a fair point for culturalization. Just the same way you translate games, I think that's important in the context of some games that resonate very particularly in some region of the world.
So, what are some of the biggest challenges developers face when integrated AI into games today?
Well, it's probably more for you, Valerio, but top of mind, I could think that it comes at a cost as well, and I think the audience today is probably a more entrepreneur and startups and smaller and medium enterprise. So, what kind of resources do you have? What kind of skill sets do you have to really exploit AI? And I think we have the chance that more and more model becomes open source, and there's a lot of tools out there that starts to provide benefits. There's definitely a lot to choose from and explore for your own problems. And you guys tell me, maybe the audience, but I feel like you need to be very considerate in terms of your choice from the very beginning, whether it's in terms of architecture, infrastructure, what problem you're trying to solve with limited resource as well, and will you really have the scale to use custom models, for example, or not? Yeah, and I would expect that over time, because those models get cheaper and more widely available, that's our own usage of it as people and companies, those barrier and costs will reduce, or barrier to entry. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot. I think that if I have to think in general terms, I probably don't have a good answer to this question because I have way too many things that come to mind. If we go very specific or vertically into racing games, which is what we usually do, then it's probably a bit easier because my answer is that we already are doing our best in terms of what kind of technology we use there in terms of AI, in terms of like whatever, right? So I guess that the answer is something in the middle of this gradient between what we usually do and the expectation of the broad range of the game industry. So you said probably that you said exploiting, and probably that risk is the one that comes to mind, like the top risk that I'm considering into integrating AI is definitely exploiting AI. Either if I run it on the cloud, if I run it locally, and in both cases, I see so many issues with. Yeah, I'm not sure you guys are familiar with the term, but there is a term called subversive game design, which is basically play style. That has to do with the fact that I want to break a system to actually do what I want to do as a player. So sometimes what you do is you give Lego bricks to players and then you just watch them do whatever they want, right? And these are, it's a very specific subgenre of game design, and I love it for many reasons. First of all, I love to break things as well, so that's amazing. But giving something to break to players, which you coded and you try to restrict as much as possible, always results in new ways. And if you cannot restrict too much or enough, depending, what players can do, they will break the world probably. Yeah, very dangerous. How can the gaming industry overcome these challenges to fully leverage AI potential?
I guess that's a great and very deep question, right? I mean, we need some sort of standards that everybody can get behind, and I think also the tools that everybody is using, whether it's Engine or the Jira, Confluence, and so on. I think this will be very important, especially for smaller companies, that those tools are getting rolled out and provide really practical AI to studios without necessarily having to build your own custom solutions again. Otherwise, the fight is not going to be a fair one. And yeah, I guess it's also about collaboration between companies and maybe also outside the industry with research centers. And I think there's a lot of movements in every industry at the moment, and I'm sure this will permeate across the different industries, because a lot of those use cases, like source of truth, for example, is not specific to gaming, right? That's maybe a simple one, but I'm sure we'll see a lot more and get this network effect of the technology just spreading through every industry.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. So very practical AI makes a lot of sense to me as well. Because exactly what you say, giving very practical tools to everybody, that automatically means that everybody can do much more and better than what we are currently doing. So I'm sorry if it's an easy answer, but I do agree. It's perfect.
I think it's quite key because Microsoft's quite OpenAI and starting rolling all those tools into the software, but it feels sometimes, I don't know what's your guys' experience, and a bit of a nerd, but I'm not a technical expertise, and sometimes you really have to be very creative and educated about the tools to really exploit it and understand its shortcoming as well. While Apple approach seems to be a lot more consumer driven, and it's like, hey, you want to send a picture of for the birthday of your mom, you can easily do that, or whatever that is. Yeah, and I think this approach is also necessary to really spread the technology across and bring new use cases. And I'm excited to see both sides of the coin.
Yeah, we probably need both approaches. That's a very good point. I agree. So if a small game development company wants to integrate AI into their creative process, where should they start?
Again, I think on the lowest hanging fruit, I would imagine. I'm not a small studio, but you need to make sure that you're not getting into those shiny objects that never really bring any practical value. You need to understand your resources and your people and your training data, if any, at use, and really start with what problem do you really want to solve? Yeah, is that a game design thing that you want to experiment on that's never been seen before? Or is that really just about efficiency in your studio, and I don't know, you don't have any HR resources and you need to go through 100 candidates? Can generative AI help you scan through multiple applicants and make sure that they are in line with your job description that you're looking for, and plan your interviews at least to some extent, and so on and so forth. So I think it really needs to be practical. This is what I think is pretty core, but again, maybe I'm not the best person to ask here.
So I have been a small game dev, right? So, and fun enough, we are talking about AI because these days we always talk about AI. And one of my co-founders at some point just says, everything that you have showing me and that you have been showing me in the last months, it has been amazing, but I will be truly impressed only the day that AI does my taxes for me. And I do agree in the sense that, like, the day that AI removes the part of the parts of my job that I really don't want to do, that day is probably the day that I'll be super happy. And at that point is I would say it's the same approach to this question. Like, back in the days, the very first people that we hired, it was somebody to manage invoices and bureaucracy and all of that, because I was a programmer. I was a programmer by choice. I was a CEO by mistake, probably. So I just didn't want to do my taxes and invoices and all of that. So yeah, that's my answer. I remove the boring parts and the parts that I really don't want to do from the work. How can indie game devs use AI to compete with larger studios?
Again, I'm going to speculate because this is not my field, but thinking about your experience, and you kind of fall into it. You have great ideas, and you need to run so many things at the same time, right? Running a studio, budgets, and people, and so on and so forth. So probably as you start and as you need to be agile and lean, it's probably about your ability of being a lot faster and a lot more agile in the choice you make and the tools that you want to leverage to solve some of your problems. Of course, everybody should be considerate of the ethical use and safe use of AI and the consequences. But I would imagine that this is a lot easier for a smaller company to experiment and to see what fits them most, because they are, again, like smaller and more agile than large company with a lot of complexity into it. I don't know what you think, Valerio.
Guess you just don't want, competition, Pierre.
Yeah.
But jokes aside,
You keep us on our toes. And I actually play mostly indie games because that's where most of the innovation happens for me, I have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, jokes aside, I guess the biggest, the best answer that I can give is like AI for a small studio should be literally the access to experience, knowledge, and expertise that you cannot afford to some extent, or that you simply don't have. So just the ability, okay, let's draft a marketing plan for my next game. That's something that, if you are your first experience, your first game, you have to publish something because, you don't have a publisher. You have to do it on your own. Getting access to, some bulk of knowledge and expertise, it's definitely better than nothing. I remember back in the days we had to figure out how to do everything because there was no network, there wasn't a real industry, like there wasn't much. So like just the fact that I could ask ChatGPT questions probably is already something much better than what we had back in the days. And that's probably just the very first answer that I can give you. But the long story short is like try to leverage AI to getting access to knowledge, expertise, better than what you can usually do without. How can small to medium-sized game dev companies implement AI solutions on a limited budget?
Yeah, I guess this adds a layer of whether you should build your own custom AI solutions for your particular problem, or again, if you should buy off-the-shelf solution that are maybe not exactly suited to your needs, or partner and work with a technology company that can help you with data processing and using some pre-built AI solutions to your problem, while there is a compensation in you using the tech stack and cloud services and so on. So I think it really depends on what's setup and context you have in the company. Again, looking at what problem you're trying to solve and what data you have available, what are your means, and yeah, putting all of that together into a good plan.
Thanks.
I think we are probably in that bracket, I would say.
Yeah. Fun enough, I'm the do-it-yourself guy at my company, which means my answer is always, okay, try to work something together and see what happens. Because I mean, if you want to run your own, like let's say, local LLM or something like that, you can probably do it on consumer hardware easily. For a small, we're talking to small, yeah. For a small studio, that's super easy. For a medium, which is pretty much my size, you need like, I don't know, 1480 or 1490 probably is like more than enough, and that's like, I don't know, 10,000 euros, something like that for for a few years of decent hardware. That's that's a good deal to me. So do it yourself is always the answer. Now let's talk about the big ones. So if
so
a
long
big,
you don't need to
come again, Pierre?
Sorry, I think I have a bit of lag. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, so the
Hello?
next question is like, if a big game development company wants to integrate AI into their creative process, where should they start? Pierre,
I
can
think
you
I'm
hear
having
us?
some now. I can hear you, but I'm not sure if you guys can hear me.
Now we can. We probably lost you for a second. So the question was, if a big game development company wants to integrate AI into their creative process, where should they start?
Yeah, I think it's a continuation, and sorry if there's any lag of what we were saying before. Obviously, when you start having a lot more resources available, a lot more expertise within the group, access to computing power as well, as you mentioned, maybe the computing power that you need for solving the problem that you have in in a medium-sized studio or game budget is different than 100 million game which try to achieve some really transformative experience, having something that's never been seen before. And yeah, you definitely needs to look at doing something very bespoke, and for that you need the right resources, the right computing power, and expertise. So yeah, I think we're probably, as far as Playon is concerned, in between medium and big, and we are on the beginning of a journey. I can't really speak into details as you know already, Valerio, but yeah, I don't know if you want to add to that from your perspective.
I probably don't know, but if I can do a little bit of inference here, I guess that like securing enough computing power is probably where I will start.
So you need to apply now for a tensor GPU in 2 years from now, when you reach 150 people in the studio, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, can you think of any genre-specific AI innovations that could transform gameplay experiences?
Yeah, I think we talked about it in terms of narrative experience and being able to have contextualized NPC. That's one. I think the personalization of the experience is really important. You mentioned some use cases already, but if you're a very competitive player and you want to make sure that you get a lot more unlocks to go through, or you're an explorer and you want to a very bespoke loot to go through the game, AI can definitely help you doing that. And I'm sure there are many experiences that we are not even thinking about right now that's going to come to us by various places, and that's going to be really exciting to see in maybe a few months or years from now what kind of transformative experience we can think about. But yeah, I think especially in the context of having franchises that spans across multiple media, you can start connecting things in a very meaningful way. Again, I can't really expand myself in specific details, but yeah, maybe the way you interact with a franchise in the game, and then this continues because of integrated data on other platform, or on commerce platforms and so on, and maybe you can buy what you've just seen in game instantly, and have maybe another medium experience that's based on your actual gameplay experience that you had in a game, for example. I'm gonna leave it open.
Okay. I'll try to do the experiment of thinking something else compared to what we already said and you mentioned. For instance, one thing that I would love to see AI applied to is like physics. There are a lot of games that are based on physics, and the point about the physics solvers that we do have right now in games is that they are limited to the extent of like we only have like 16 milliseconds to run for each frame. We are limited to literally the problems that you can solve with that physics engine, and we are limited to the representation of the physical objects as well, to simple shapes most of the time. So it would be lovely at some point to see what AI can do there in terms of like you can probably use AI to run an approximation of a physics engine. And then the nice part about that is that you can run inference on something that you haven't trained for. And probably checking those extremes will be super interesting for me. So that would be transformative in my mind. Imagine a game focused heavily on play of choice and consequence. How could the AI be used to enhance the complexity and impact of player decisions?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes back to my mind is what we touched on already. You said you play RPG, and something that's kind of immersion breaking as well is sometimes the stupidity or the lack of context of NPCs. And when you can start having a conversation in a village in your next RPG game, and you've been behaving bad, and people have seen it from their own NPC eyes in that context, and then they start talking to you about what you've done, and that's really amazing. You really feel immersed into the game, and having a lot more intelligent experience than we ever seen so far. So I'm personally excited about that as a RPG player.
Yeah, no, I first of all, I agree. And I also think that, you mentioned at the very beginning of this talk, the demo that NVIDIA showed at latest GDC, the NVIDIA Ace, the one where you wander inside an hotel and you ask questions using your voice and you get, generative AI to provide you answers. That's probably like if you want to squint into the future, basically squint your eyes and see a little bit of the shape of the future of RPGs, that's probably the very beginning of the integration there. So anything in that direction looks super solid to me. But to the same extent, I mean, usually we do a lot of work in giving every single NPC a little bit of backstory, like a context of every single NPC as, he's a citizen, does this as a job, is X years old, and so on. Like there is already a little bit of context for every single NPC out there, but like generative AI can definitely help in giving that NPC like a proper background story, super easy. Specific responses because of that story, probably doable. Emotions to some extent, or like the impression of emotion, that would be super interesting as well. Sorry, Pierre, you were saying?
No, I just wanted to say the dynamic context as well is super interesting, right? When you start talking to an NPC and the other one here, it's kind of thing. But right now, in the games as we build it, it's not necessarily something that's tracked or used by AI. But in the future, I can definitely see that becoming the norm, yeah, and that's pretty exciting. Or maybe right now we're limiting ourselves to the current hardware that we have for input, but maybe we can imagine that there is other types of hardware, let's say your camera, that can analyze your emotion and then integrate it in your gameplay as well, or haptic feedback, or any kind of input that can basically increase the immersion and the personalization of the experience. I think is really, really interesting.
I do scare easily for other games, so a welcome that looks at me while I'm playing to scare me more is I'm already scared.
Sure.
Okay, so the next one is, how can AI help maintain player engagement in long-term games, such as like MMOs or live games?
Yeah, I mean, one of the easy answer, I guess, is the fact that you can build a lot more content and make it a lot more relevant to people experiences or expectation as well. So whether it's in terms of expanding the game worlds, because you're able to build that a lot quicker and a lot more efficiently, or making it more relevant because you're able to capture telemetry data or the source of data that customize the experience based on the users. I think is really interesting. I think we can probably think also about player personalization and user generated content in that context as well. What do you think, Valerio?
I guess for me, like the critical element here is the promise that we make to players about the evolution of the world and probably a little bit of the story as well in live service games. So like I still remember the very first time that I got that promise that was with Matrix Online. So it was like this kind of MMORPG where you play in the in the Matrix universe, and the promise to players there, well, it was something like you can continue the story of Matrix in the game, and you'll get more elements from the movies, and you get more story after the movies. So all of that was was a huge promise for the time, and the delivery was, I would say, very suboptimal. But that happens with a lot of the um, live games out there. So the content that actually evolves the world and brings and moves the story forward is very limited to big patches, moments in time. Sometimes at some point it will happen something that will create this jump forward in the game. Probably the the moving from this model to something a little bit more nuanced, a little bit that every day something happens that will move everything forward. Pretty much like the real world. That's probably one of the most interesting paths for me. I'm not sure if you're following, like, for instance, Helldivers right now, but I mean that's a huge example that you can use to, like, okay, there is a game master moving the story forward and evolving the universe in this case, and it is engaging to a lot of players because of that. So I would love to see like the same kind of attention and nuance evolution and cadence, probably frequency, to other games as well.
For sure.
How do you see AI and human creativity working together in game development? Yeah, we probably already gave enough context and answers to this question, but if there is anything you want to add?
I think we touched on that, is what you said, and I agree with you. I'm having difficulty to hear you now.
Yeah, that's exactly what I said. Is there anything that you want to add there?
No.
Okay, so the next one is, can you provide an example of a creative aspect of game dev where AI could play a crucial role?
Yeah, again, I think we probably touched on most of it, whether it's in terms of assets creation, where the heavy lifting is done, and then the artist comes and refine the assets, or in terms of a narrative, kind of the same thing. Always, looking at the I don't know if it's 80-20, but the heavy lifting of any task along the value chain of creating a game and shipping it to markets can be aided by AI.
Yeah, I guess my answer is related to the first one when I said, do my taxes for me. But, generalizing a little bit, that answer is, I guess the point is always try to relieve pain points. So anything that is painful for a company, at some point should be heavily managed by AI. That's my expectation and hope at some point. Like, for instance, we are reiterating for the 100th time the trailer cinematic pipeline, where we make trailers for our games internally every time, and that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work that is a little bit far from what we usually do. So we try to do our best, but it's not exactly our job. So, like, for instance, that's something that I'm pretty sure AI could be very, very good at. Just delivering trailers that are super efficient when it comes to, like, gameplay trailers, for instance, like show the gameplay beats that resonate with a very specific kind of public. That kind of stuff would be an amazing tool to have. Yeah, I think we did talk about the next one as well. But as usual, if there is anything that you want to add, how can AI be used to create more dynamic and adaptive storylines in games?
Yeah, I think we touched on that as far as my imagination and knowledge can go. But let's talk about it in a year from now, maybe.
That's a good one. I'll make a reminder in 1 year then. What are the potential benefits of challenges of using AI for narrative generation?
Yeah, I think similar, right? I don't think I have anything to add, Valerio. I don't know if you hear me still.
Yeah, yes, we can. Yeah, no, I think we already talked about biases.
Yeah, and breaking immersion risk and so on.
Okay, next then. What new game mechanics could be made possible by advancements? So AI should definitely fix my pronunciation at some point. By AI.
Yeah, that's probably the $1 million question, right? Well, I mean, obviously, we can't talk about things that are being worked in the background, but yeah, I think think about what kind of experience are currently kind of limited, and going back to your point about what are pain points for us as companies, I think it's the same thing with pain points for users. It's like, what is the main difference between, I would say, almost the real world and the game experience, and whether it's dumb NPC or AI pathfinding or things like that, or like unrealistic physics behavior in games, and lightning and these kind of things. I think we see some of it already, or like before static weather. Now it's there's dynamic as well. All those aspects, I guess. I don't know if you have a less political answer to give, Valerio.
So I did talk briefly before about the fact that I would love to see Gen AI apply to physics engines. I think again, generalizing a little bit, that the same answer is like, if we can have AI to simulate or approximate a simulation of everything that we cannot simulate today in games, that will be, I will say, amazing. So we don't have a way to simulate electricity. We don't have a way to simulate thermodynamics. Cloth is always difficult. So there's a lot there that could be done by probably AI in terms of like an approximate of today, and Gen AI later. But again, if you want to generalize even more and try to look a little bit more into the future, if you think about AI replacing systems of subsystems that basically create a game engine, so the foundation of what we do. Let's think about every single one's like, okay, let's remove the input manager and use AI for that. So you just have an input stream of some way, and then you have AI that actually tries to have the best real implementation of the inputs that the user wanted to give. Sometimes there is this huge gap between what a user wants to do and what a user is able to do. So using AI to reduce that gap would be fantastic. If we imagine using AI to replace the rendering engine, so that's a huge one, right? I mean, to me, if you get an AI and you run image generation with a little bit of temporal coherence at 60 FPS, that's a rendering engine to me. And a couple of months ago, I think, somebody actually achieved something similar using stability AI model. So it was super easy and very small scale. But again, if you want to squint into the future, that's probably something around it, right? So let's say I want to make a game, and the game will be just blockouts, and then the aesthetics of the game, the rendering of it, will be managed by an AI. And one prompt could be the aesthetics that I want to that game. So like, let's say, let's move from Super Mario aesthetics to Dark Souls one. That would be something super interesting to see as well. We already answered this one, I guess, but how might AI influence the way we think about traditional game mechanics, such as puzzles or combat systems?
Yeah, that's one for you to develop, Valerio.
You're just being lazy now, man. Jokes aside, yeah, I think I already answered most of this. Like when it comes to physics, and yeah, I know that I'm talking about physics a lot, but that's something that I hope that AI tackles as soon as possible. But combat systems, that's probably as interesting as everything else in terms of like that could be there's definitely a huge gap that could be filled by a proper AI in combat systems, because combat system is something super difficult to do a fine tune to the expectations of the player, like in general, but then also the technical bits are difficult. So like collisions in the classic combat games are super difficult. I'm pretty sure you play Tekken or any of those. So getting right the hit boxes and getting right every single hit is actually a big difficult problem for any game dev out there. So I'm not saying that AI should be the one in care of like taking care of the physics issues here, but definitely about providing better feedback to every single hit. That would be amazing. Like for instance, if you use generative AI for animations and specifically for blend spaces between two different animations, there's a huge gap there where we try to do interpolations and a little bit of like some kind of very basic AI right now, but using something better, more complex there, that will give probably a much deeper experience to combat systems and combat games in general. So well, I took the combat as melee combat. I guess that applies to everything, like guns, weapons, as well. But I do care more about the implementation of melee physics because it's more difficult, probably. How might AI be used to monitor and moderate player behavior in online games?
Yeah, I think we see a lot already on the market, and I can also think about our colleagues in Milan at Milestone, who I think 2 or 3 years ago implemented already a system for Hot Wheels where you can create your own racing tracks, and it's not very difficult to imagine what kind of racing track design you could see and which shape and forms that people would abuse and and put out there to everyone to see and download. So they are using an AI filtering system. As far as I know, it is the case at Milestone and any other case that I know, but maybe Valerie others. There is always a human check at the end because it's kind of tricky to capture everything and the nuances and the context when it comes to detecting toxic behavior. Like the Riot Games has also a system that monitors the chat logs and the interaction between the players. And at the end of the day, as far as I know, there is so far always a human that go through this initial filtering and flags of abuse and toxic behavior and so on.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. And probably in addition to that, what I will try to do at some point is like having AI doing the filtering, but then probably also being the first responders. That would be interesting as well. Because if you try to intercept like an abusive behavior or anything like that, and you try to create a dialogue with the attacker, that would probably be a more constructive option than just the usual ones that we use, like banning the player or giving penalties of that kind of stuff. So that could be again an interesting point, I guess, in the future.
Mhm.
And this connects us to the next question, which is what are the ethical considerations in using AI for player surveillance? That's a bit negative. And moderation.
Yeah, I think it fits within the policies at least that we have on our side, and I'm sure many bigger companies as well that needs to have a fair treatment and legal treatment of personal data and just following a basic ground principle of ethics and data protection.
Yeah, I mean, we do the same in the sense that, like, if we ever, well, I mean, for what we are doing and also in the future, I think it's worth it. If we ever gonna use player data and use it within an AI system, that will be locally and will have the same kind of security and applications as normal data treatment. So
Mm.
that's an easy one for me. I mean, we will take the exact same precautions. How can
Maybe
AI?
sorry, maybe a sad question to you, Valerio, but I would think that we can expect a lot more companies starting to collect data, especially in gaming, that of all shapes and scale and genre, that were not necessarily capturing data before to inform some of the systems, whether it's in terms of moderation or what kind of contents to put out next, and so on and so forth. And again, I look forward for the basic tools to provide also those abilities for any kind of studios.
Well, fun enough, I did say something similar like 10 years ago when we were talking about data-driven companies and data-driven decision-making within enterprises. And I will say I do have the exact same questions today when it comes to AI. I mean, the exact same things and pipelines probably apply.
Mm.
So we are pretty close to the final ones. So I will say that, I read a few next ones, but if any of you do have a question, then we'll prepare a microphone and
Well, I'm using Unreal Engine 2, and I'm also using AI tools and such. And I'm wondering how a developer company can find a balance between staying all the way in all the innovative things that you can do, and also deliver a product. Because if I think about Unreal Engine 5 was like 1 year and a half ago, and there are already 4 different versions. And also, more than 2 years ago, ChatGPT wasn't even a thing. So how can you balance between innovation and also creating a product?
I guess the best answer I can give you is like you don't. You pick one and you try to best to balance the other. But I mean, jokes aside, so for instance, for us it's probably a bit easy. I'm not sure how big your company is.
Yeah, it's big. It's Thales Alenia Space.
Oh. Hi, space guys. Okay, then for us it's like we have one guy, which is the one that we always ask to update the engine, and it's always the same one. We are training a second one, but the short answer is like there's one guy that does basically only that.
Poor guy.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry for the laugh. But yeah, that was the maniacal evil laugh. Yes, you're absolutely right. Poor guy. And then the other part is that we do have one guy that basically is the one that does a lot of research and prototypes about pretty much anything, which is me during the nights.
If I may add to that, and I think Vala, you're more well placed to talk about, but I think it's quite interesting to look at code assistant as well when it comes to Unreal and any other like reference, because I have a feeling that it could be really useful to quote your source code and the documentation of the engine, and be able to give at least basic answers that maybe take 50 or 60% of the time of your main programmer to answer basic things that maybe other people needs to ask him all the time, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure about you guys, but for instance, we did move to Visual Assist like ages ago. And then we ran a few prototypes with people using Copilot instead of Visual Assist for a few months. Like we try to do this, small prototypes in the studio still today. Probably not the super edgy tech that we could experiment on, but it's like as edgy as we can.
Yeah, what I do, it's a pretty niche thing in Thales Alenia, because I'm doing simulation of what a camera could see in a space mission, so that vision algorithm can be tested on it. And I am the only one developing that tool, and I always have to balance between should I do this update and risk to break all my work. Start over. Yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah, welcome to the dream.
Yeah.
But jokes aside, we pretty much have the same dilemma every single time that a new, engine version is released. And I guess the short answer is we still try to update as soon as possible. With this very specific exception of like we are too close to a milestone delivery or too close to the release of the game. So at that point, we don't stop, but we do it in a separate branch, and then we release it afterwards, which is not my best answer, because I'm the probably one of the nerdiest guys we have in the studio. So I am, the biggest number is always the best one. So the most updated version is always the best one. But it's not like it's not healthy. It's not it's not a good practice as a company. So that that I know of.
Yeah, I'm 5.1, so I'm not in that.
We are in 5.4.1. So yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So I have one. And how do you deal with the trade-off between, so generative AI is big, everyone knows that. How do you deal with the trade-off between server-side generative AI and local one? So you can actually run a small side LLM on a computer, but not everyone that plays a video game has the computing power to do that, especially if they have like mobile. How do you plan to deal, maybe now or in the approximate future, on that problem?
So I guess the short answer is that at some point I really hope MPUs become like super popular and enough powerful to run pretty much anything we want locally. But that's at that point you still have like another huge array of issues anyway. But that's I would say that's the very beginning of like a proper future with AI everywhere. And we are getting there, right? I mean, MPUs are already on the phones and have been there for a few years now. There is this huge talk in the tech space about MPUs in the laptops because of Copilot Plus and blah blah blah. So that's something. But again, one way that we have been always using these kind of technologies, like the edgy ones, or the limited ones, like ray tracing for a while, VR for another while. It really depends on the years. Like we do have cycles. And the short answer is like we try to build something that runs on the best hardware possible, and that in that we provide the best experience possible for the ones who have the latest GPU or MPU on blah blah blah. In that case, and then everything else we provide the choice to the user. You can run it on the cloud if you care about that part of the experience, or you just avoid it if you don't. So my answer today would be we ask the user what they want. Much like if you want to run a game at like 120 FPS and you don't care about graphics fidelity that much, then then you care about frame rate and you care about the optimal image quality. You get very different experiences. But that that's a decision that we should leave to the user, if you ask me. And that's I guess that's the first big part of my answer. And the second part is probably that I always try to incentivize the use of local devices anyway. So I will try to avoid cloud computing as much as possible for games, at least. What about you, Pierre?
Yeah, I'm also thinking, maybe we'll see in the future where if we can't kind of like turn on or off some of those gameplay experiences that are running on NPUs or in the cloud, and if the users doesn't have the NPUs, maybe there will be a way for shifting part of this cost to the customer as well, and make him understand that okay, the experience is best played with AI on, and if the user doesn't have NPUs, then maybe there is a way for still offering the option, not to be predatory about it, but still offer the best experience possible while not waiting for NPUs to really penetrate the market, because we see now a big year for that, and but I don't really get the impression that they are positioned as gaming hardware, and the use cases are more general purpose than gaming at the moment.
Yeah, that being said, I mean, I will also add the fact that NPUs are built for inference, but at the same time, I mean, you do have enough computing power on the GPU if you are running some kind of low fidelity video game in terms of like, let's avoid the ray tracing, let's avoid a bunch of stuff, but you want to run inference locally. I mean, that's something you can easily do probably with the average GPU on Steam.
Thank you both. And if someone else doesn't have any more questions, I have another one. So one big concern of mine is that generative AI will eventually flatten the creativity level of creative tasks. And what do you think about this wave of creativity flattening of art? And of course, can this apply to video games once video game studios will adapt generative AI to workflows?
I believe there will be a flood of flat content quality-wise. So at some point, quantities will be huge compared to quality spikes. I do believe that. But at the same time, I honestly don't believe that the fault there is AI. Quite the opposite. I think if we do experience like some kind of raise in the baseline of quality, it's also thanks to AI. And if we do experience like better peaks at the same time, I think it's gonna be thanks to AI. For a long series of reasons. Like, so the very beginning is like we can focus on thinking more than implementations. We can focus on better personal communication more than like finding information. We can focus on other things. So that's my expectations. That's what I would like the future to be like, and all of that should help us, achieving those better peaks and better baseline. I'm not afraid of the flood of content, honestly. I'm not afraid of that. I think we're already experiencing some of that in various measures in a lot of the industries. And I don't think that's an intrinsic problem of what we're doing. Pierre?
No, I agree with that. I think in the end, we're not only competing on graphical fidelity or just money of the users, but very much time as well. So at the end of the day, the most innovative and creative games will prevail. But I think I do, as an extended concern, as a thing that we already see, attention span of people and inventory of getting exposed video games is getting scarce. Would a lot of flat quality AI content exacerbate this problem? It remains to be seen, but the problem already exists, as you said, Valerio.
Thank you both. I will leave to Giovanni, my colleague, the goodbyes for this session. So we thank you both for everything. And this has been a very interesting talk. And so, Giovanni, if you want to add something.
Thank you. You both. We switch into Italian for the closure. Grazie a tutte e a tutti per essere venuti a questa serie di lezioni. Questa è l'ultima di questo modulo e ci auguriamo di farne altre anche per il vostro interesse, così per divulgare con tutte le varie informazioni riguardanti Generative AI e andare quindi a comprendere a fondo sia i vantaggi che gli svantaggi che questa porta e future innovazioni. Volevo solo accennare giusto una piccola informazione, sia per chi ci sta seguendo da casa, online, in ufficio, sia qui che in presenza. Abbiamo un magazine chiamato Magazine AI, trovabile al sito magia.news, che riguarda tutte le informazioni, quindi molto aggiornate su quello che sta uscendo, sulle ultime novità in ambito AI, su tutti i vari fronti, quindi sia tecnologico sia anche videoludico e anche pop AI su questo. Grazie mille a tutti, spero vi sia interessato a questa discussione e ci siete connessi per future diciamo, informazioni sui prossimi moduli.
Grazie.
Grazie.
Grazie Pier.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
Take care.